Hi boys and girls, and welcome back to another edition of Snack Time with a Dollop of Read Aloud. Today we're going to continue with our current read aloud, which is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling, with permission granted by Scholastic Book Publishing for me to be able to share this amazing book with you. Now, when we left off, Harry had experienced his first week of school at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And we discovered that, yes, some of it was amazing, like learning about transfiguration and all of that. Also, the crazy number of staircases that the kids kept getting lost in and doors that wouldn't open. And there was a lot going on. Ghosts that kind of wandered the hallway, including a naughty ghost named Peeves. We also discovered that there were some things about his new school that were just not so great. Like, well, Peeves again, but Professor Snape, who really seemed to dislike him right away. Not to mention, he traded in one bully in Dudley for another bully in Malfoy and Crabbe and Goyle. The big difference is, though, when Harry was at home with the Dursleys, he had to deal with Dudley all by himself. Now it seems that Harry is developing a group of friends in Ron and possibly Hermione, and he's not as alone as he once was. So maybe dealing with Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle isn't going to be as hard as dealing with Dudley on his own, but we'll find out. Today's chapter is Chapter 9, The Midnight Duel. Here's the picture art for it. Can you see it? It's like a little picture, and Harry's standing, well, it's not a little picture, it's a big picture, and Harry's standing right in front of it. Or going behind it. I think that's a painting of the fat lady. All right, are we ready? Here we go. Harry had never believed that he would meet a boy he hated more than Dudley. But that was before he met Draco Malfoy. Still, first-year Gryffindors only had potions with the Slytherins, so they didn't have to put up with Malfoy much. Or at least they didn't until they spotted a notice pinned up in the Gryffindor common room that made them all groan. Flying lessons would be starting on Thursday, and Gryffindor and Slytherin, of course, will be learning together. Typical, Harry said darkly. Just what I always wanted, to make a fool of myself on a broomstick in front of Malfoy. He had been looking forward to learning to fly more than anything else. You don't know that you'll make a fool of yourself, said Ron. Anyways, I know Malfoy's always going on and on about how good he is at Quidditch, but I bet he's all talk. Malfoy certainly did talk about flying an awful lot. He complained loudly about first years never getting on the house Quidditch team and told long, boastful stories that always seemed to end with him narrowly escaping muggles in helicopters. That he wasn't the only one, though. The way Seamus Finnegan told it, he spent most of his childhood zooming around the countryside on his broomstick. Even Ron would tell anyone who would listen about the time he had almost hit a hang glider on Charlie's old broom. Everyone from wizarding families talked about Quidditch constantly. Ron had already had a big argument with Dean Thomas, who shared their dormitory, about soccer. Ron couldn't see what was exciting about a game with only one ball where no one was allowed to fly. Harry had caught Ron prodding Dean's poster of West Ham soccer team trying to make the players move. Neville had never been on a broomstick in his life because his grandmother had never let him near one. Privately, Harry felt she had had good reason, because Neville managed to have an extraordinary number of accidents, even with both of his feet firmly planted on the ground. Yikes. Hermione Granger was almost as nervous about flying as Neville was. This was something you couldn't learn by heart or out of a book. Not that she hadn't tried. At breakfast on Thursday, she bored them all stupid with flying tips she had gotten out of a library book called Quidditch through the ages. Neville was hanging on to her every word, desperate for anything that might help him hang on to his broomstick. But everyone else was very pleased when Hermione's lecture was interrupted by the arrival of mail. Harry hadn't had a single letter since Hagrid's note, something that Malfoy always was quick to notice, of course. Malfoy's Eagle Owl was always bringing him packages or sweets from home, which he opened and gloated at the Slytherin table. The Barn Owl brought Neville a small package from his grandmother. He opened it excitedly and showed them a glass ball the size of a large marble, which seemed to be full of white smoke. "It's a remembrall," he explained. "Gran knows I forget things. This tells me if there's something you've forgotten to do. Look, you hold it right like this and it turns red." Oh, his face fell because the remembrall had suddenly glowed scarlet. "You've forgotten something." Neville was trying to remember what he had forgotten when Draco Malfoy, who was passing the Gryffindor table, snatched the remembrall right out of his hand. Harry and Ron jumped to their feet. They were half hoping for a reason to fight Malfoy, but Professor McGonagall, who could spot troubles quicker than any teacher in the school, was there in a flash. "What's going on?" she asked. "Malfoy's got my remembrall, Professor." Scowling, Malfoy quickly dropped the remembrall back onto the table. "I was just looking," he said, and he sloped away with Crabbe and Goyle. At 3:30 that afternoon, Harry, Ron, and the other Gryffindors hurried down the front steps onto the grounds for their first ever flying lesson. It was a clear, breezy day, and the grass rippled under their feet as they marched down the sloping lawns toward a smooth, flat lawn on the opposite side of the grounds of the Forbidden Forest, whose trees were swaying darkly in the distance. The Slytherins were already there, and so were 20 broomsticks, lying neatly on the ground. Harry had heard Fred and George Weasley complain about the school brooms, saying that some of them started to vibrate if you flew too high, or always flew slightly to the left. Their teacher, Madame Hooch, arrived. She had short gray hair and yellow eyes like a hawk. "Well, what are you waiting for?" she barked. "Everyone stand by a broomstick. Come on, hurry up." Harry glanced down at his broom. It was old, and some twigs even stuck out of it at odd angles. "Stick your right hand over the broom," called Madame Hooch up at the front, "and say, 'Up!'" "Up, up, up!" everyone shouted. Harry's broom jumped into his hand at once, and it was one of the few that actually did. Hermione's simply rolled over on the ground, and Neville's hadn't moved at all. Perhaps brooms, like horses, could tell when you were afraid, thought Harry. There was a quiver in Neville's voice that said only too clearly that he wanted to keep his feet on the ground. Madame Hooch then showed them how to mount their broom without sliding off the end, and walked up and down the rows, correcting their grips. Harry and Ron were delighted when she told Malfoy that he had been doing it wrong. Malfoy argued that he had been flying for years, and Madame Hooch responded, "Well, you've been doing it wrong for years. Now, when I blow my whistle, you will kick off the ground hard. Keep your broom steady, rise a few feet, and when you come straight back down by leaning forward slightly. Now on my whistle, 1, 2... But Neville, nervous and jumpy and frightened of being left on the ground, pushed off hard before the whistle had even touched Madame Hooch's lips. Oh no. "Come back, boy," she shouted, but Neville was rising straight up like a cork shot out of a champagne bottle. 12 feet, 20 feet. Harry saw his scared white face look down at the ground, falling away from him. He saw him gasp, slip sideways off the broom, and wham! A thud and a nasty crack, and Neville lay face down on the grass in a heap. His broomstick was still rising higher and higher, starting to drift lazily toward the forbidden forest, and then it swooped out of sight. Madam Hooch was bending over Neville, her face as white as his. "Broken wrist," Harry heard her mutter. "Come on, boy. It's all right. Time to get up." "Up you get. Come on." She turned to the rest of the class. "None of you will move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave those brooms where they are, and you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch." "Come on, dear." Neville, his face tear-streaked, clutching his wrist, hobbled off with Madam Hooch, who had her arm around him. No sooner were they out of earshot than Malfoy burst into laughter. "Did you see his face? The great lump!" The other Slytherins joined in. "Shut up, Malfoy," said Parvati Patil. "Ooh, are you sticking up for Longbottom?" said Pansy Parkinson, a hard-faced Slytherin girl. "Never thought you'd like a little crybaby, Parvati." "Look," said Malfoy, darting forward and snatching something out of the grass. "It's that stupid thing Longbottom's Gran sent him." The Remembrall glittered in the sun as he held it up. "Give that here, Malfoy," said Harry quietly. Everyone stopped talking to watch. Malfoy smiled nastily. "I think I'll leave it here, somewhere where Longbottom to find. How about maybe up in a tree?" "Give it here," Harry yelled, but Malfoy had leapt onto his broomstick and had taken off. He hadn't been lying. He could fly well. Hovering level with the topmost branches of the oak, he called, "Come and get it, Potter!" Excuse me. Harry grabbed his broom. "No!" shouted Hermione. "Madam Hooch told you not to move. You'll get us all into trouble." Harry ignored her. Blood was pounding in his ears. He was so angry. He mounted his broom and kicked hard against the ground. Up and up and up he soared. Air rushed through his hair and the robes whipped out behind him. And in a rush of fierce joy, he realized he had found something he could do without being taught. He could fly. This was easy. This was wonderful. He pulled the broomstick up a little to take it even higher and heard screams and gasps of girls back on the ground and an admiring whoop from Ron. He turned his broomstick sharply to face Malfoy in midair. Malfoy looked stunned. "Give it here," Harry yelled, "or I'll knock you off that broom." "Oh, yeah?" said Malfoy, trying to sneer, but looking worried. Harry knew somehow what to do. He leaned forward and grasped the broom tightly in both hands, and it shot towards Malfoy like a javelin. Malfoy just got out of the way in time. Harry made a sharp about-face and held the broom steady. A few people were clapping. "No! Crabbe and Goyle, up here to save your neck, Malfoy!" Harry cried. The same thought seemed to have struck Malfoy. He was alone. "Catch it if you can, then," he shouted, and he threw the glass ball high into the air, and it streaked quickly towards the ground. Harry saw, as though in slow motion, the ball rise up in the air and then begin to fall. He leaned forward and pointed his broom handle down. Next second, he was gathering speed in a steep dive, racing the ball. Wind whistled in his ear, mingled with the screams of people watching. He stretched out his hand. A foot from the ground, he caught it, just in time to pull his broom up straight, and he toppled gently onto the grass with the Remembrall clutched safely in his hand. "Harry Potter!" His heart sunk faster than he had just dived. Professor McGonagall was running toward him. He got to his feet, trembling. "Never in all of my time at Hogwarts!" Professor McGonagall was almost speechless with shock, and her glasses flashed furiously. "How dare you! Might have broken your neck!" "It wasn't his fault, Professor." "Be quiet, Miss Patil." "But Malfoy—" "That's enough, Mr. Weasley. Potter, follow me." Harry caught sight of Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle triumphant faces as he left, walking numbly in Professor McGonagall's wake as he strode towards the castle. He was going to be expelled. He just knew it. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but there seemed to be something wrong with his voice. Professor McGonagall was sweeping along without even looking at him. He had to jog just to keep up. Now he had done it. He hadn't even lasted 2 weeks. He'd be packing his bags in 10 minutes. What would the Dursleys say if he showed up on their doorstep? Up the front steps of the marble staircase inside, and still Professor McGonagall didn't say a word to him. She wrenched open the doors and marched along corridors with Harry trotting miserably behind her. Maybe she was taking him to Dumbledore, he thought, of Hagrid, expelled but allowed to stay on as a gamekeeper. Perhaps he could be Hagrid's assistant. His stomach twisted as he imagined it, watching Ron and the others becoming wizards while he stumped around the grounds carrying Hagrid's bags. Professor McGonagall stopped outside a classroom. She opened the door and poked her head inside. "Excuse me, Professor Flitwick. Could I borrow wood for a moment?" Wood? Thought Harry, bewildered. Was wood a cane? Was she going to use a cane on him? But wood turned out to be a person, a burly fifth-year boy from Gryffindor. He came out of the classroom looking quite confused. "Follow me, you two," said Professor McGonagall, and they marched up the corridor, Wood looking curiously at Harry. "In here," Professor McGonagall pointed them to a classroom that was empty except for Peeves, who was busy writing rude words on the blackboard. "Out, Peeves!" she barked. Peeves threw the chalk at the bin, or into a bin, which clanged loudly, and he swooped out, cursing. Professor McGonagall slammed the door behind him and turned to face the two boys. "Potter, this is Oliver Wood. Wood, this is Harry Potter. I found you a seeker." Wood's expression changed from puzzlement to delight. "Are you serious, Professor?" "Absolutely," Professor McGonagall said crisply. "The boy's a natural. I've never seen anything like it. Was that your first time on a broomstick, Potter?" Harry nodded silently. He didn't have a clue what was going on, and he didn't seem to be getting expelled, and some of the feeling started to come back to his legs. "He caught the thing in his hand. About a 50-foot dive," said Professor McGonagall as she told Wood what she had seen. "Didn't even scratch him. Charlie Weasley couldn't have done it. I tell you that." Wood was now looking as though all his dreams had suddenly come true. "Even a game... Ever seen a game of Quidditch, Potter?" he asked excitedly. "Wood's captain of the Gryffindor team," Professor McGonagall explained. He's just the build for a seeker too," said Wood, now walking around Harry and staring at him. "Light, speedy. We'll have to get him a decent broom, Professor. A Nimbus 2000 or a clean sweep 7, I'd have to say. I shall speak to Professor Dumbledore and see if we can bend the first-year rule. Heaven knows we need a better team than last year. Flattened in that last match by Slytherin. I couldn't look at Snape in the face for weeks." Professor McGonagall peered sternly over her glasses at Harry. "I want to hear you're training hard, Potter, or I might change my mind about punishing you." Then she smiled suddenly. "Oh, Harry, your father, he would have been proud. He was an excellent Quidditch player. Did you know?" "You're joking." It was dinner time. Harry had just finished telling Ron what had happened when he had left the grounds with Professor McGonagall. Ron had a piece of steak and kidney pie halfway in his mouth, but he had forgotten all about it. "Seeker," he said. "But first years never. You must be the youngest player in about..." "A century," said Harry. Shoveling pie into his mouth, he felt particularly hungry after the excitement of the afternoon. "Wood told me." Ron was so amazed, so impressed, he just sat and gaped at Harry. "I start training next week. Only don't tell anyone. Wood wants to keep it a secret." Fred and George Weasley now came into the hall and spotted Harry and hurried over. Well done, said George in a low voice. Wood told us. We're on the team too. We're the beaters. I tell you, we're going to win that Quidditch Cup for sure this year, said Fred. We haven't won since Charlie left, but this year's team is going to be brilliant. You must be good, Harry. Wood was almost skipping when he told us about you. Anyway, we've got to go. Lee Jordan reckons he's found a new secret passageway out of the school. Bet it's in that one behind the statue of Gregory the Smarmy that we found in our first week. See ya. Fred and George had hardly disappeared when someone far less welcome turned up. Malfoy, framed by Crabbe and Goyle. Having your last meal, Potter? When are you getting the train back to those muggles? You're a lot braver now that you're back on the ground and you've got your little friends surrounding you, Harry responded coolly. There was, of course, nothing little about Crabbe and Goyle, but as the high table was full of teachers, neither of them could do more than just crack their knuckles and scowl. I'd take you on any time, said Malfoy. Tonight, if you want. Wizard's duel. Wands only. No contact. What's the matter? Never heard of a wizard's duel before, I suppose? Of course he has, said Ron, wheeling around. I'm his second. Who's yours? Malfoy looked at Crabbe and Goyle, sizing them up. Crabbe, he said. Midnight, all right. We'll meet you in the trophy room. That's always unlocked. When Malfoy had gone, Ron and Harry looked at one another. What's a wizard's duel? Asked Harry. What do you mean you're my second? Well, a second's there to take over if you die, said Ron casually, getting started at last on his cold pie. Catching the look on Harry's face, he quickly added, but people only die in proper duels, you know, with real wizards. The most you and Malfoy would be able to do is send sparks at each other, and neither of you knows enough magic to really do any damage to each other. I bet he expects you to refuse to show up anyways. And what if I wave my wand and nothing happens? Throw it away. Punch him in the nose, Ron said. Excuse me? They both looked up. It was Hermione Granger. Can a person eat in peace in this place? Asked Ron. Hermione ignored him and spoke to Harry. I couldn't help but overhearing what you and Malfoy were saying. I bet you could, Ron muttered. And you mustn't go wandering around the school at night. Think of all the points you'll lose for Gryffindor if you're caught. And you're bound to die anyways. It's really just selfish of you. And it's really none of your business, responded Ron. Goodbye, he said after that. At the same time, it wasn't what you would call a perfect end to the day. Harry thought as he lay awake much later, listening to Dean and Seamus falling asleep. Neville wasn't back from the hospital wing yet. Ron had spent all evening giving him advice as, if he tries to curse you, you better dodge it, because I can't remember how to block them. There was a very good chance that they were going to get caught by Filch or Mrs. Norris, and Harry felt he was pushing his luck, breaking another school rule today. On the other hand, Malfoy's sneering face kept looming up at the out of the darkness. This was his big chance to beat Malfoy face to face, and he wouldn't miss it. 11:30, Ron muttered at last. 11:30, Ron muttered at last. We better go. They pulled on their bathrobes, picked up their wands, and crept across the tower room, down the spiral staircase, and into the Gryffindor common room. A few embers were still glowing in the fireplace, turning all the armchairs into hunched black shadows. They had almost reached the portrait when a voice spoke from the chair nearest them. I can't believe you're going through with this, Harry. A lamp flickered on, and it was Hermione Granger wearing a pink bathrobe and a frown. You, said Ron furiously. Go back to bed. I almost told your brother, Hermione snapped. Percy, he's a prefect. He would put a stop to this. Come on, he said to Ron. He pushed open the portrait of the fat lady and climbed through the hole. Hermione wasn't going to give up easily. She followed Ron through the portrait hole, hissing at them like an angry goose. That, by the way, is a simile. Don't you care about Gryffindor? You only care about yourselves. I don't want Slytherin to win the House Cup, and you'll lose all the points I got from Professor McGonagall for knowing about switching spells. Go away. All right, but I warned you. Just remember what I said. When you're on the train home tomorrow, you are so... But what they were, they didn't find out. Hermione had turned to the portrait of the fat lady to get back inside and found herself facing an empty painting. The fat lady had gone on a nighttime visit, and Hermione was effectively locked out of Gryffindor Tower. Now what am I going to do? She said shrilly. That's your problem, said Ron. We've got to go. We're going to be late, thanks to you. They hadn't even reached the end of the corridor when Hermione caught up with them. I'm coming with you. No, you're not. Do you think I'm going to stand out here and wait for Filch to catch me? If he finds all three of us, I'll tell him the truth, that I was trying to stop you, and you can back me up. You've got some nerve, Ron said loudly. Shut up, both of you, said Harry sharply. I heard something. It was a sort of sniffling. Mrs. Norris, breathed Ron, squinting through the dark. It wasn't Mrs. Norris. It was Neville. He was curled up on the floor, fast asleep, but jerked suddenly awake when they crept nearer. Thank goodness you found me. I've been here for hours. I can't remember the new password to go to bed. Keep your voice down, Neville. The password's pig snout, but it won't help you now. The fat lady's gone off somewhere. How's your arm? Said Harry. Fine. Madame Pomfrey mended it in about a minute. Good. Well, look, Neville, we've got to be somewhere. We'll see you later. Don't leave me, said Neville, scrambling to his feet. I don't want to stay here alone. The Bloody Baron's been passed twice already. Ron looked at his watch and then glared furiously at Hermione and at Neville. If either of you get us caught, I'll never rest until I've learned the curse of the boogies that Quirrell told us about, and I will use it on you too. Oh my gosh. Hermione opened her mouth, perhaps to tell Ron exactly how to use the curse of the bogies, but Harry hissed at her to be quiet and beckoned them all to follow. They flitted along the corridor, striped with bars of moonlight from high windows. At every turn, Harry expected to run into Filch or Mrs. Norris, but they were lucky. They sped up to a staircase and to the third floor and tiptoed across to the trophy room. Malfoy and Crabbe weren't there yet. The crystal trophy cases glimmered where the moonlight caught them. Cups, shields, plates, statues winked silver and gold in the darkness. They edged along the walls, keeping their eyes on the doors at either end of the room. Harry took out his wand in case Malfoy leapt in and started at once. The minutes crept by. He's late. Maybe he's chickened out, Ron whispered. Then a noise in the next room made them jump. Harry had only just waved his wand when they heard someone speak, and it wasn't Malfoy. Sniff around, my sweet. They might be lurking in a corner. It was Filch, speaking to Mrs. Norris. Horror-struck, Harry waved madly at the other three to follow him as quickly as possible. They scurried silently towards the door, away from Filch's voice. Neville's robes had barely whipped around the corner when they heard Filch enter the trophy room. They're in here somewhere, probably hiding. This way, Harry mouthed to the others, and petrified, they began to creep down a long gallery full of suits of armor. They could hear Filch getting nearer. Neville suddenly let out a frightened squeak and broke into a run. He tripped, grabbed Ron around the waist, and the pair of them toppled right into a suit of armor. Oh my gosh. The clanging and the crashing were enough to wake the entire castle. Run! Harry yelled, and the four of them sprinted down the gallery, not looking back to see whether Filch was following. They swung around the doorpost and galloped down one corridor, then another, Harry in the lead without an idea of where the others had gone, or where he was going. They ripped through a tapestry and found themselves in a hidden passageway, hurtled along it, and came out near the charms room, which they knew was miles from the trophy room. I think we lost him, Harry panted, leaning against the cold wall and wiping his forehead. Neville was bent double, wheezing and sputtering. I told you, Hermione gasped, clutching at a stitch in her side. I told you. We've got to get back to Gryffindor Tower, said Ron, and as quickly as possible. Malfoy tricked you, Hermione said to Harry. You realize that, don't you? He was never going to meet you. Filch knew someone was going to be in the trophy room. Malfoy must have tipped him off. Harry thought she was probably right, but he wasn't going to tell her that. Let's go, he said. It wasn't going to be that simple. They hadn't gone more than a dozen paces when a doorknob rattled, and someone came shooting out of a classroom in front of them. Oh no, it was Peeves. He caught sight of them and gave a squeal of delight. Shut up, Peeves, please. You're going to get us thrown out, Peeves cackled. Wandering around at midnight, ickle firsties, tut tut tut. Naughty, naughty, you get caughty. Not if you don't give us away, Peeves, please. Should I tell Filch? I should, said Peeves in a saintly voice, but his eyes glinted wickedly. It's for your own good, you know. Get out of the way, snapped Ron, taking a swipe at Peeves, which was a big mistake. Students out of bed, Peeves bellowed. Students out of bed, down in the Charms corridor. Ducking under Peeves, they ran for their lives right to the end of the corridor where they slammed into a door and it was locked. This is it, Ron moaned, and they pushed helplessly at the door. We're done for. This is the end. They could hear footsteps, Filch running as fast as he could towards Peeves' shout. Oh, move over, she snarled. She grabbed Harry's wand, tapped the lock, and whispered, Alohomora. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. They piled through it, shut it quickly, and pressed their ears against it, listening. Which way did they go, Peeves? Filch was saying. Quick, tell me. Say, please. Don't mess with me, Peeves. Where did they go? Shan't say nothing if you don't say please, said Peeves in an annoyingly sing-songy voice. All right, please. Nothing. Ah, told ya I wouldn't say nothing if you didn't say please. Ah! And they heard the sound of Peeves whooshing away and Filch cursing in rage. He thinks the door is locked, Harry whispered. I think we'll be okay. Get off, Neville. For Neville had been tugging on the sleeve of Harry's bathrobe for the last minute. What? Harry turned around and saw quite clearly what, for a moment, he was sure he'd walked into a nightmare. This was too much. On top of everything that had happened so far. They weren't in a room, as he had supposed. They were in a corridor, the forbidden corridor, to the 3rd floor. And now they knew why it had been forbidden. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog. A dog that filled the whole space between the ceiling and the floor. It had 3 heads. 3 pairs of rolling mad eyes, 3 noses twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths and saliva hanging in slippery ropes from their yellowish fangs. It was standing quite tall, all 6 eyes staring at them. And Harry knew that the only reason they weren't already dead was that their sudden appearance had taken it by surprise. But it was quickly getting over that. There was no mistaking what those thunderous growls meant. Harry groped for the doorknob. Between Filch and death, Harry would take Filch. They fell backwards. Harry slammed the door shut and they ran. They almost flew down the corridor. Filch must have hurried off to look for them somewhere else because they didn't see him anywhere. But they hardly cared. All they wanted to do was put as much space as possible between them and that monster. They didn't stop running until they reached the portrait of the fat lady on the 7th floor. What on earth have you all been? Where on earth have you all been? she asked, looking at their bathrobes hanging off their shoulders and their faces sweaty and flushed. Never mind that. Pink snout, panted Harry, and the portraits swung forward. They scrambled into the common room and collapsed, trembling into armchairs. It was a while before any of them said anything. Neville, indeed, looked as if he would never speak again. So funny. What do you think you're doing? What do they think they're doing? Keeping a thing like that in a school? Locked up in a school? If any dog needs exercise, that one does for sure. Hermione had got both her breath and her bad temper back again. You don't use your eyes, any of you, she snapped. Didn't you see what it was standing on? The floor, Harry suggested. I wasn't looking at his feet. I was too busy looking at its heads. 3 heads, by the way. No, not the floor. It was standing on a trap door, you dolts. It's obviously guarding something. She stood up, glaring at them. I hope you're pleased with yourselves. We could have all been killed. Or worse, expelled. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to bed. That's my favorite line, by the way. Ron stared after her, his mouth open. No, we don't mind. You didn't think we dragged you along, wouldn't you? But Hermione had given Ron something else to think about as he climbed back into bed. The dog was guarding something. What had Hagrid said? Gringotts was the safest place in the world for something you wanted to hide, except, perhaps, for maybe Hogwarts. It looked as though Harry had found out where that grubby little package from Vault 713 had ended up. All right, so boys and girls, this was a particularly long read, about 36 minutes. So what I want you to do is I want you to think long and hard about the adventure that Harry, Ron, Neville, and Hermione had tonight. They definitely could have gotten in trouble when they met that Cerebus, the 3-headed dog. So I want you to think about how lucky they were and why rules like staying in bed or not going wandering around at night are important. Maybe you could share a rule that you think is really important that your parents make sure they tell you to keep you safe in the comment section down below. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this extra long edition of Snack Time with a Dollop of Read Aloud. I will see you tomorrow. I miss you, I love you, and I hope you stay safe. Bye, guys.